Welcome to the Legal Landscape and another edition of our employment law podcast, Panic.
At the water cooler.
It seems every 4 years, federal agencies have an impact on the workplace and employers, and we expect this year to be no different.
Right.
So we're going to talk about what employers should expect in light of the upcoming new administration.
Yes.
A quick legal disclaimer, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It's not intended to be legal advice and does not establish an attorney-client relationship. The topics we discuss are subject to change, and legal advice of any nature should be sought from your legal counsel.
So let's start with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. What does it look like now in terms of the makeup, and what do we expect to change?
So right now it's a Democratic majority, and we don't expect that to change until 2026. But employers should still be aware of some upcoming changes. For example, we expect the EEOC chair to be Republican. So that's going to set the policies and decisions coming out of the EEOC. And so we'll probably have more Republican-friendly policies coming out of the EEOC.
Or employer-friendly policies.
Employer-friendly policies.
Yes. Yep. So right now, federal agencies look ahead to the next presidential term, right? Mm-hmm. And looking at what their budget's going to be like, their resources, whether or not the government's going to back their efforts. And so with the EEOC, it's no different. They're going to be looking ahead to see if they have enough money and resources to conduct investigations the way they want, to process charges, to file lawsuits. And we think, as you just said, with more of a employer-friendly and the Republican presidency, that there probably are going to be budget cuts, and they're going to have less resources. How does that impact the workplace, more specifically for employers?
Yeah, so we expect that the EEOC will kind of back off litigation and enforcement actions. And instead, because of their budgetary constraints, they're going to prioritize mediation, voluntary compliance, guidance instead. And so that might have an impact on how they enforce Title VII. So there might be less enforcement action. Of course, Title VII is the discrimination, harassment, retaliation laws relating to age, race, disability.
All the protected
categories. Yeah.
Right, which the EEOC enforces.
Right.
So on that note, we believe that it is likely the EEOC will be processing less of the frivolous charges that we see. So for example, most of the offices, the intake offices, put charges in one of three piles or buckets. So when they get a charge, they assess it. They either put it in the first bucket, which is, this is frivolous. We're not going to have the employer answer with a position statement. We're just going to issue a notice of right to sue. Let them go to court. Clog up the courts that way.
Yeah.
The second pile or bucket is charges that have maybe some merit to them, and they want to get a response from the employer, and then they'll investigate. The third bucket are those charges that are way more serious, that they say, okay, we're going to do conciliation. With the new EEOC, we expect that there will be more charges put in the, we can't handle this seems to be frivolous, we don't have a lot of resources. That pile is going to go up.
Sure.
The second pile then will go down of, we need to investigate this and get employers' responses. But for employers, they need to be mindful that those charges probably then are more likely to have merit and should be taken seriously.
Okay, that makes sense.
We also expect to see some policy shifts in workplace guidance. We think that the new EEOC is likely to roll back and rescind some of the Obama-era policies. What are some of those?
Yeah, so probably the one that's top of mind right now is LGBTQ plus policies. So under Title VII, gay and transgender workers are protected from harassment, discrimination, retaliation based on their sexual orientation. And the EEOC guidance backs that up. They directed employers to allow employees to use the restroom that's associated with their gender identity, use their preferred pronouns, but we expect that might be reversed. We also expect that DEI and affirmative action programs might also be rescinded.
And we've seen that already in some of the states, and whether or not they're going to continue with DEI programs or rename them. And so with the Republican presidency, that's going to continue to happen?
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
And we also think that the administration is going to revisit pay data collection efforts. So under Obama, there was a big push for employers to submit pay data to the government so that they could determine whether employers were discriminating based on pay. And then under Trump's first administration, he reversed that. And Biden has said he's going to try to pass something like that in January. But if he does, we expect Trump's going to reverse that again.
He's just going to take it back.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is good for employers.
This is good for employers.
Okay. All right.
So what do we know about changes to the EEOC chair?
That's a great question, Kelsey. So what we know is that Andrea Lucas, a Republican, is expected to be appointed as the EEOC chair. And she's talked about her views and expressed her thoughts. And so we know that the EEOC is likely to take less of a broad view of some of these laws, like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act.
Okay.
So, for example, she's expressed thoughts that the EEOC is taking too broad of a view regarding abortion-related care and travel. And so that might get rolled back.
Okay.
We also know that the EEOC, so that act was passed in 2023, and we know that the EEOC filed its first lawsuit against a company for not allowing a pregnant worker to
remain in the workplace.
Right. And to have the accommodation that she wanted and her doctor expressed or, put in the medical advice in terms of the restrictions she had.
Okay.
Instead, the company said, you're going to take unpaid leave.
Okay.
They held the job for her, but they said, you're going to take unpaid leave. That's the accommodation. That's our business needs. We want to fill the job and have someone else that is fully capable of doing it now, not needing accommodation.
Okay.
The EEOC said you can't do that.
Okay.
What we expect is the new EEOC, and Ms. Lucas's view will be, you can do that. Employers can and do have a say over the accommodation that they can mandate for that employee because they are giving an accommodation and they think it's reasonable according to their business need.
It's just not the employee's preferred accommodation.
That's right.
But it is a reasonable accommodation in light of their business needs.
Right. All right, let's shift to the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. We know that a new general counsel will be appointed and they will be Republican. And so just like the EEOC, we expect that federal agency to shift as well. Also, breaking news. So last week, there was a vote to not vote on the retention of a Democratic incumbent.
Okay.
Allowing for now the NLRB to shift to a Republican majority.
Okay.
So I don't think that was that expected. We thought the NLRB really wouldn't change for another year or so, but it's going to change.
But there's already been a vote not to vote.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
And so in light of that, we expect some of the NLRB decisions to be overturned or rescinded.
Right.
Recently, unions just received more power from the board relating to a management rights clause. So historically, employers are able to make decisions under a collective bargaining agreement through the management rights clause.
Right.
But now the board has just held that employers have less power under that clause. And in order to make decisions, they either have to bargain for it or they have to ask the union for permission.
Okay.
So there was some power taken away from employers relating to a management rights clause. But we expect under the Trump administration that employers will get more power back to make decisions as they see fit for their workplace under the management rights clause.
And that's one of several things that we expect to be rescinded. What are examples of other
Yeah, so employee surveillance is another one. So basically, you couldn't really surveil your employees in the workplace or track any type of potential union activity. But we think under the Trump administration, they'll be able to manage their workplace and surveil their employees a little bit more closely as long as it's business related.
And when you say surveil, we don't mean that the companies are walking around with cameras everywhere watching them. Mm-hmm. We mean more that they're keeping track of their terms and conditions of their employment as in the workplace, right? Like as it relates to social media and kind of the activities that they're engaging in.
Yeah, which kind of leads into captive audience meetings too, like what they can and cannot mandate.
Right. So recently, the board ruled that employers cannot mandate captive audience meetings if there was going to be discipline for the employee up to and including termination.
Okay.
So they said those meetings should be voluntary. We expect the new NLRB to roll that back and say, well, the employers have the power to control their workplaces as they see fit. So especially if they're paying the employee and the employee's on site and they want to have a meeting regarding
potential union avoidance.
Right.
Yeah.
Then they should be allowed to do so. So Kelsey, what about non-competes? We've seen some noise around those over the last few years. What do we expect with the new NLRB?
Yep. So right now they're looked at with strict scrutiny. We just saw the Federal Trade Commission tried to ban them altogether. Obviously that did not pass, but the current NLRB takes a similar stance and basically says that non-competes infringe on workers' rights under the National Labor Relations Act. But we think with the new administration, employers will be able to actually enforce their non-competes, their restrictive covenants to protect their workforce, their products, and their services.
Great. So union elections?
Yeah, another big area is union elections. And as we know, they're very fast and furious. So sometimes employers don't even know there's an election going on until it's too late. They can't really take steps to try to rescind the vote or engage in any type of union avoidance. So we think under the new administration, those rules will be a little bit more lax. Employers can take more action relating to union avoidance. And we also think penalties associated with unfair labor practice charges will be lessened because they've recently been increased, even relating to post-settlement damages. So we think those types of damages might be rescinded. Employers will have more control over their workforce and be subject to less penalty.
Right, and that's a very pro-employer stance because then that does give them power back over the workers, the workplace and the workers that they're paying and that they're trying to manage and, have input on their terms and conditions of employment.
Right.
Right now, with the definition under independent contractor for the NLRB has narrowed over the last few years. What we can expect is that the NLRB, the new one, will broaden that definition and allow for more workers to be classified as independent contractors, which in turn, again, same thing, right? It allows employers to run their workplaces as they see fit.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, we just saw in the news something related to reality TV stars, Love is Blind.
Yes. So that came from some complaints about the working conditions for the reality TV stars that were part of that show. And they're not alone. There's been complaints with other shows as well about the terms and conditions of their work environment and the long hours and harassment in the workplace. And so the reaction was, well, if we make them employees, they're going to be able to avail themselves of the protections under Title VII and other employment laws. What do we think will happen under the new administration?
Yeah, so it's interesting because Trump used to be a reality TV star.
That's
what kind of stance he would take on this? But we think under the new administration that more employers or more employees will be able to be classified as independent contractors now.
Okay. Let's shift over to immigration, one of the hot topics during the election and some of the changes that we expect. I think the first one is with I-9s. I think that employers should make sure that they have I-9s and those forms are filled out because there's going to be audits because that'll be in line with the new administration's agenda to engage in mass deportations.
Okay.
I think the second area is it's going to be more difficult for employers to employ employees as skilled workers under H-1B visas. Okay. I think those processing times are going to take longer. We think that there's going to be more denials. And so employers that have skilled workers are going to have to be mindful of that. We also expect there to be, like the first Trump administration, more workplace raids.
Okay.
And so employers are going to want to make sure that they have their documentation in line for those workers that could be affected by it.
And we also might see a big push towards E-Verify. Right now, it's not mandated that everybody use it, but it might be. And then another big one is travel bans, because under the first Trump administration, we saw some types of travel bans. You couldn't do business with certain countries. So employers should just be prepared for that as well.
Right, especially if you have a workforce where you're traveling to like the Middle East or other countries that were subject to the last travel ban. Employers should be mindful that that might affect who can travel and if they can. All right, finally, let's talk about the impact on the judiciary.
Yep. So as lawyers, we're obviously very attuned to the fact that Trump is going to have an influence over the federal judiciary and the decisions coming out. So we expect those to be more employer friendly, and the EEOC, NLRB, and immigration guidance relating to that also is likely to be more pro-employer.
Yeah, they're going to be impacted, those laws.
Right.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Please reach out to us with any questions, comments, workplace needs. Next time on Panic
at the water cooler,
we're going to cover mental health in the workplace. So we hope you join us. Thank you.